The man I picked up on the side of a sun-baked New Mexico highway had my father's eyes. I should have kept driving. But my late husband, Arthur, had always said my heart was 2 sizes too big for my chest, and seeing a man of my own vintage, 60s, silver-haired, with a face mapped by sun and time, standing beside a dusty backpack made my foot ease off the accelerator. He looked less like a threat and more like a retired professor who'd misplaced his university. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon, as we have new stories every day. Like and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. My Volvo station wagon, a relic from 1998 that I called Bess, crunched onto the gravel shoulder. The heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves. I rolled down the passenger window, letting the air conditioning spill out like a guilty secret into the desert furnace. "Looks like you're a long way from anywhere," I said, my voice as calm as if I were offering a neighbor a cup of sugar. He smiled, a tired but genuine gesture that crinkled the corners of those familiar blue eyes. "The world is full of anywhere. I'm just trying to find a specific one." His voice was a low, pleasant rumble. He wasn't asking for a ride, just stating a fact. "Hop in," I offered. "The air's free and the company's, well, you get what you pay for." He laughed, a sound like rustling leaves, and swung his pack into the back before settling into the passenger seat with a grateful sigh. "Name's Finn," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused. "Alara," I replied. "And you can thank Arthur. He's the one who would have insisted." "Your husband was," I said, my gaze flickering to the small, unassuming wooden box on the back seat, nestled among my knitting bag and a stack of road maps. "We're on one last trip together." The first 100 miles passed in the easy silence of strangers who are comfortable with the quiet. Finn looked out the window, his gaze sweeping over the mesas and the endless sky. I focused on the road, my hands, dappled with age spots, steady on the wheel. They were the same hands that had raised 2 children, kneaded countless loaves of bread, and held Arthur's as he slipped away. Now they were chauffeuring a ghost. "Where you headed, Alara?" Finn asked eventually, turning those unnerving eyes on me. "East," I said vaguely. "Following the sun." Figured after 45 years of schedules and responsibilities, I owed myself a trip with no destination. A lie. Every mile was meticulously planned. Every stop had a purpose. But he didn't need to know that. "A good philosophy," he nodded. "I'm heading for a small town in Pennsylvania. Willow Creek. Ever heard of it?" A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my spine. My fingers tightened on the wheel. Willow Creek. I hadn't heard that name spoken by a stranger in 50 years. It was the place I was born, the place I had fled, the place my entire meticulously constructed plan was leading me. "I might have passed through once," I managed, my voice miraculously even. "What's in Willow Creek for you?" He sighed, a long, weary sound. "Answers, I hope. It's where I was born. I was adopted as a baby. All I have is a town name on a crumpled piece of paper and a feeling." My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady hum of Bess's engine. Coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. But as I glanced at his profile, the strong set of his jaw, the shape of his nose, the exact shade of his eyes staring out at the landscape, a cold, terrifying possibility began to crystallize in the desert heat. It was the same profile I saw in faded black and white photographs of my father, the same jawline I saw in the mirror every morning, softened by age but undeniably there. "What's the paper?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. "Part of a birth certificate, I think. Most of it's missing. Just the place and a date. October 12th, 1958. The world tilted. October 12th, 1958. A day etched into my family's lore. The day my mother went into early labor. The day my baby brother was born, and the day, they told me, he died. A weak heart, they'd said. He never drew a proper breath. I was 8 years old. I remember my father's hollowed-out expression, my mother's vacant, tearless grief. They never spoke of him again. Thomas. His name was Thomas. "Finn," I said, my voice a strained whisper. I pulled Bess over to the side of the road, the tires kicking up a cloud of red dust. I turned to face him, my whole body trembling. My mother used to sing me a lullaby when I was a girl. An old Irish tune nobody seemed to know. It went like this. I hummed the first few bars, the melody of Phantom on my lips. It was a tune of pure melancholy, a song about a lost lamb finding its way home in the mist. Finn's face went pale beneath his tan. His jaw dropped slightly. He stared at me, those piercing blue eyes wide with disbelief. Slowly, as if pulling a memory from the deepest well, he hummed the next 4 bars. The harmony was perfect. My adoptive mother, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. She said she found it written on a scrap of paper tucked into my swaddling clothes. She sang it to me every night of my life. The truth crashed down on me with the weight of 66 years of lies. This was no coincidence. The man sitting beside me, this stranger I picked up in the middle of the desert, was not Finn. He was Thomas. My brother. The ghost I never knew I was mourning, made flesh and blood. The shock was so profound it felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and resetting the entire axis of my world. My solo trip for carefully planned revenge had just picked up a passenger, and he was the very reason the revenge was necessary. The silence in the car was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. We just stared at each other. He was seeing a sister he never knew he had. I was looking at a life stolen, a 64-year-old phantom brought to life by a forgotten melody on a forgotten highway. The initial shock was a tidal wave, but in its wake, something else washed ashore, a cold, hard certainty. For decades, my life had been defined by a quiet, simmering resentment. My parents, Charles and Marion Albright, were pillars of Willow Creek society. They owned Albright Textiles, the town's lifeblood. They valued legacy, reputation, and control above all else. They had favored my younger sister, Beatrice. Beatrice, who was beautiful, pliable, and married a man with the right surname. I, on the other hand, had been the difficult one. The bookish, sharp-tongued daughter who married Arthur, a history teacher with calloused hands from his garden and a bank account that made my father sneer. When our parents died, the will was a brutal final word. The controlling shares of Albright Textiles, the sprawling family estate, the accumulated wealth of generations, it all went to Beatrice. I received a token trust, enough to live comfortably but never to have a say, a pointed reminder of my status as the disfavored daughter. The official reason was that I had married outside the family's interests. But I always suspected there was more to it, a deeper, uglier secret I could never quite grasp. Now, sitting beside my living, breathing brother, I understood. With a male heir, the line of succession was secure. But a son, Thomas, would have inherited everything. He would have superseded both Beatrice and me. By faking his death and giving him away, my parents had accomplished 2 things. They had eliminated a child they clearly didn't want, for reasons I couldn't yet fathom, and they had retained the power to choose their successor. They chose Beatrice. My journey was no longer aimless. The small wooden box in the back was not Arthur's ashes. Arthur was buried peacefully back in California. The box contained my tools, burner phones, encrypted laptop, copies of old financial documents I had spent years quietly acquiring, and detailed dossiers on my sister and her smug, corporate shark son, Julian, who now ran the company. I wasn't scattering ashes. I was planting seeds of destruction. "My name is Thomas," he whispered, finally breaking the silence. It sounded foreign on his tongue. "I know," I said, my voice steady now, the tremor replaced by steel. "Welcome back." We drove on, but the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I explained everything. The family, the business, the betrayal. I watched him absorb the information, his face a canvas of disbelief, then anger, then a profound, hollow sadness for the life he'd never lived. Why, he kept asking, a question that hung in the air-conditioned quiet of the car. Why would they do it? Power, I answered, the word tasting like poison. And control. Our parents weren't warm people, Thomas. They were architects of a dynasty. You didn't fit the design. I had always known my parents were cold, but this was a level of cruelty that defied reason. A sick child, perhaps? A baby born with some defect they deemed unworthy of the Albright name? We didn't have the answers, but I knew who did. Beatrice. She was 10 years younger than me, but she had been our mother's confidant. If anyone knew the full story, it was her. My plan had been to methodically dismantle Julian's overleveraged business ventures, expose his shady dealings, and watch as Beatrice's carefully curated world of garden parties and charity galas crumbled under the weight of financial ruin. It was to be a quiet, elegant revenge, a death by 1,000 paper cuts. But Thomas's existence changed the equation. This was no longer just about my inheritance or my pride. It was about a stolen life. The revenge needed to be louder. It needed a face. His face. Our first stop was a small town in Oklahoma. I rented us 2 rooms in a nondescript motel. While Thomas, who was still struggling to reconcile his identity as Finn with this new reality, processed the bombshell, I got to work. I pulled out the wooden box. The old Arthur would have shaken his head at my clandestine arsenal. The new, posthumous Arthur, I liked to think, would have been cheering me on. I established a new, secure internet connection and began the next phase of my operation. My target was the Albright Textiles Legacy Gala, a lavish affair Beatrice threw every year to celebrate the company's founding. It was in 3 weeks. It was the perfect stage. We can't just walk in there and announce who you are, I told Thomas over lukewarm motel coffee the next morning. They'll deny it, discredit you, paint you as a con man. My sister is a master of public perception. So what do? He asked, his hands wrapped around the flimsy styrofoam cup. He looked lost, a man untethered from his own history. We arm ourselves with irrefutable proof, I said. And we give them just enough rope to hang themselves. My plan had 3 prongs. First, legal. We needed concrete evidence of his birth. I had already identified a potential weak link in Willow Creek, a retired county clerk named Eleanor Vance, a woman my mother had always disdained for being gossipy. People my mother disdained often held grudges. Second, financial. If a baby was secretly given away, there had to be a money trail. A payoff to a doctor, a donation to an orphanage, something. My nephew, Julian, was arrogant. I gambled that he would have been too lazy to properly bury the family's oldest skeletons, assuming no one would ever look for them. My old contact, a disgruntled former bookkeeper from Albright Textiles named Marcus Thorne, whom Julian had unceremoniously fired, had hinted at sealed ledgers from my father's era. Third, the final, undeniable proof, DNA. A public confrontation would mean nothing without it. First thing, I said, pulling a prepaid SIM card from its plastic holder. You are no longer Finn. But you can't be Thomas Albright yet either. For now, you are Thomas Finnegan, an old friend of my late husband. An art historian specializing in textile patterns. It will give you a reason to be at the gala and a plausible cover for your interest in the company's history. He nodded slowly, a spark of Alara's own methodical resolve beginning to light in his eyes. The drifter was fading, and a man with a purpose was starting to emerge. Our journey east took on a new urgency. We were a strange pair. A grandmother in a sensible station wagon and a quiet, contemplative man who looked like he'd be more at home on a mountaintop than in a conspiracy. We talked for hours. He told me of his life, a string of odd jobs, a failed marriage, a daughter he was estranged from. A life of searching for a sense of belonging that had always eluded him. I told him about the hollow chill of our childhood home, the pressure to be the perfect Albright daughter, the quiet rebellion of marrying a man for love instead of status. We were filling in the 64-year-old gaps in each other's lives. We were becoming family. When we arrived in Pennsylvania, we settled in a town an hour away from Willow Creek. I booked us a small, furnished cottage. It was our war room. The first order of business was a discreet trip to a private lab for a sibling DNA test. We sent it in under false names. The results would be express shipped in a week. Tick-tock. Next was Eleanor Vance, the retired clerk. I found her living in a neat little bungalow, her days filled with gardening and neighborhood watch. I approached her as Alara Carmichael, the daughter who got away. I didn't mention Thomas. I spun a tale about doing genealogical research for my children, wanting to build a family tree. Eleanor, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper memory, remembered me. "Marian Albright's girl," she said, her lips pursed. "You were the clever one. Your mother never liked that." Over tea and biscuits, I steered the conversation towards the old days, the town records. "It's so silly," I said with a theatrical sigh, "but I'm trying to find the records for my little brother. The one we lost. Thomas." My mother was always so devastated she refused to speak of it, and "I'd like to put a flower on his grave, if he even has one." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Funny you should mention that," she said, leaning in conspiratorially. "I was just a junior clerk then, but I remember it. Your father came in himself to file the death certificate. Highly unusual. Dr. Miller, the family physician, was supposed to do it. But Charles Albright insisted. He seemed agitated. Not grieving, agitated." My heart leaped. This was it. "But the strangest thing," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "there was no corresponding record of interment from the town cemetery. No plot purchased. No burial permit. A child, even a stillborn, has to be buried somewhere. For a family like the Albrights to not have a plot, a headstone, it was unheard of." "What do you think happened?" I asked, holding my breath. "I think," she said, a grim smile on her face, "your father paid Dr. Miller a great deal of money to sign a piece of paper, and your baby brother was very much alive when he left that hospital." Bingo. It wasn't proof, but it was a powerful thread. She told me the records from that era were now stored in the courthouse basement, on microfilm. It would be a needle in a haystack, but a needle was there. The next day, while Thomas worked on his art historian backstory, I put on my most grandmotherly dress and a pair of reading glasses and spent 6 hours in the musty basement of the Willow Creek Courthouse, squinting at flickering microfilm. My search wasn't for a death certificate. I was looking for its opposite. On my 4th roll of film, I found it. It was misfiled under A, but for the adoption agency, not Albright. A relinquishment document. Signed by Charles Albright and Dr. Franklin Miller, transferring custody of an unnamed male infant, born October 12, 1958, to the St. Jude's Foundling Home, 200 miles away. My mother's signature was nowhere to be seen. A forgery, or perhaps she was never even told her son was alive. Another layer of my parents' monstrous cruelty. I took a photo of the screen with a microcamera. Checkmate. Prong 1. Prong 2 was Marcus Thorne, the disgruntled bookkeeper. I contacted him through an encrypted messaging app, reminding him of our brief, sympathetic conversation after he was fired. I told him I had reason to believe Julian was mismanaging the company and covering up historical discrepancies. I offered him a generous consulting fee for any information he could provide on ledgers from the late 1950s. 2 days later, a data file appeared in my inbox. It contained scanned pages from a private, off-the-books ledger my father had kept. Marcus, a man of meticulous habits, had backed up everything before Julian's tech goons wiped his computer. The entries were cryptic, but one stood out. October 15, 1958, a wire transfer of $50,000, an astronomical sum at the time, to an account belonging to Dr. Franklin Miller. The memo line contained a single word, consultation. 3 days later, another entry, a charitable donation of $100,000 to the St. Jude's Foundling Home. There it was, the payoff and the price of a life. I now had the motive and the means. The DNA results arrived the day before the gala. A 999% probability of a full sibling relationship. I printed the report and sealed it in an envelope. All the pieces were in place. That evening, I sat with Thomas in the lamplight of our rented cottage. I laid out the photos of the microfilm, the ledger scans, and the DNA report on the kitchen table. He stared at them, his face ashen. The abstract story of his past was now laid bare in ink and pixels. "They sold me," he said, his voice cracking. "My own father sold me." "He didn't sell you, Thomas," I said, my voice hard as diamonds. "He discarded you. There's a difference. And tomorrow night, we are going to collect the debt." For a moment, he looked hesitant. All his life he had been Finn, the wanderer. The idea of storming the castle gates was daunting. Alara, what if we just walk away? We have each other now. Isn't that enough? I reached across the table and took his hand. It was my father's hand, strong and capable. They didn't just take your life, I said softly. They warped mine. They warped Beatrice's. They built a dynasty on a foundation of lies, and that foundation is rotten. It's not just about us. It's about the truth. We owe it to the 8-year-old girl and the newborn boy who were torn apart by their ambition. He squeezed my hand, a silent agreement passing between us. The wanderer was gone. Thomas Albright was ready to go home. The Albright Textiles Legacy Gala was held at the family estate, a sprawling stone manor that loomed over Willow Creek like a feudal castle. It was exactly as I remembered it, ostentatious, suffocating, and dripping with the cold perfume of old money. I wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress, my silver hair coiffed into a tasteful bun. Beside me, Thomas looked distinguished in a rented tuxedo. He was no longer Finn the hitchhiker. He was Thomas Finnegan, a man of substance, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. We moved through the glittering crowd, a ghost and his avenging angel. Then I saw her. My sister, Beatrice. She was holding court near the grand staircase, draped in emerald silk and diamonds, her laughter as bright and brittle as glass. Beside her stood her son, Julian, all slicked back hair and smug condescension in a designer suit. Beatrice's eyes landed on me. A flicker of annoyance crossed her perfectly made-up face before she masked it with a saccharine smile. Alara, what a surprise. I didn't think this was quite your scene. The unspoken insult, "You're not wealthy or important enough to be here," hung in the air. Beatrice, darling, I said, my own smile just as false. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'd like you to meet an old friend of Arthur's, Thomas Finnegan. Thomas is an expert in historical textiles. He was so keen to see the company's archives. Beatrice gave Thomas a dismissive up-and-down glance. Charmed, she said, before turning her attention to a wealthier-looking guest. Julian merely grunted in our direction, too busy scanning the room for people who mattered. They didn't even see it. They looked right at their brother, their uncle, and saw nothing. The arrogance was breathtaking. For the next hour, we played our parts. We mingled. We admired the family portraits that lined the grand hall, a gallery of stern-faced Albrights, my father's blue eyes staring out from every one. We listened to the obsequious speeches. Finally, Julian took the stage to give the keynote address. It was a self-congratulatory ode to legacy, family, and tradition. The hypocrisy was so thick I could barely breathe. As he finished to a round of polite applause, I made my move. I walked to the side of the stage, where the host was preparing to close the evening. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clear and firm. "I believe there's one more piece of Albright family legacy to acknowledge tonight." Before anyone could stop me, I was at the podium. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Beatrice was shooting daggers at me from her table. Julian looked furious. I tapped the microphone. "Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I am Alara Carmichael, née Albright, the other daughter." A few nervous titters from the crowd. My nephew Julian spoke so eloquently of legacy. And I want to tell you a story about that legacy. It begins on October 12, 1958. A day of great joy and great sorrow for our family. The day my brother, Thomas Albright, was born, and the day we were told he died. The room went silent. Beatrice's face had drained of all color. "We were told he was born weak," I continued, my voice resonating with 64 years of buried grief. But that was a lie. A lie told to consolidate power. A lie told to curate a bloodline. My brother was not weak. He was not dead. He was given away. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Cameras, once put away, were now being discreetly raised. "That's absurd. She's hysterical," Beatrice shrieked, rising from her seat. "Security." I held up a hand. "Please, Beatrice. Let me finish. You see, legacy has a funny way of finding its way home. I would like to introduce you all to a dear friend of mine. His name is Thomas." I beckoned to him. Thomas walked steadily from the back of the room, up the steps, and stood beside me at the podium. He faced the crowd, faced his stunned sister and nephew, and for the first time, I saw no fear in his eyes. Only a quiet, unshakable dignity. The family resemblance, under the bright lights of the stage, was undeniable, a living rebuke to their lies. "This is a ridiculous stunt," Julian sputtered, rushing towards the stage. "This man is a charlatan." "Is he?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I held up a single piece of paper. "The DNA report. Because science seems to disagree with you, Julian. This is a sibling DNA test. It proves, with 999% certainty, that this man is my brother. Your uncle." I didn't stop there. I projected the image of the relinquishment document onto the large screen behind the stage. Then the scanned page from my father's ledger, showing the payoffs. My voice was cold and precise as I narrated the evidence, weaving a tale of deception, greed, and breathtaking cruelty. The room was in an uproar. The foundation of the Albright legacy was not just cracking, it was exploding. Reporters were swarming, flashbulbs popping like fireworks. Beatrice stared at Thomas, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. "It can't be," she whispered, shaking her head. Mother told me he was malformed. That father sent him to a special home to spare us the shame." And there it was. The final, ugly piece of the puzzle. It wasn't about power alone. It was about perfection. A baby with a flaw, real or imagined, was a blemish on the Albright name, so he was erased. Beatrice hadn't been a conspirator. She had been fed a different lie, one designed to secure her loyalty and her silence. The look on her face was not of a cornered criminal, but of a woman whose entire life had just been exposed as a sham. The revenge was more complete than I could have imagined. I had sought to ruin her, but instead, I had liberated her from a gilded cage belt of lies. Julian, however, was pure cornered rat. His rage and panic were palpable. But it was too late. The story was out. The Albright name was no longer synonymous with legacy, but with scandal. In the ensuing chaos, Thomas and I slipped away. We didn't need to stay for the fallout. We had lit the fuse and walked away from the explosion. The legal and social battle was messy, but the outcome was never in doubt. With the evidence I had, bolstered by the public humiliation, Beatrice and Julian had no choice but to capitulate. Our lawyer, a sharp young woman from Willow Creek who relished the chance to take on the town's ruling family, negotiated a settlement. It wasn't about the money, not really, but we took it anyway. Thomas received his rightful third of the family trust, retroactive to our parents' death. We also took a controlling interest in the company, not to run it, but to ensure it would be run ethically from now on, with a new board. Julian was forced to step down in disgrace. But our greatest victory was the estate. The big, cold stone house I had so despised. The settlement gave us the deed. 6 months later, Thomas and I were sitting on the grand terrace of that house, sipping lemonade. The oppressive portraits of our ancestors had been taken down, replaced with bright landscapes and photos of Thomas's daughter, Sarah, who had flown out to meet the family she never knew she had. The three of us were slowly, cautiously, piecing together a future from the fragments of the past. The air was warm, and a light breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak trees my father had been so proud of. The house no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a home. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked quietly, looking out over the sprawling lawn. "The way we did it? The chaos?" I thought for a moment, swirling the ice in my glass. I looked at his face, at my father's eyes, finally at peace. I looked at the knitting lying in my lap, a brightly colored, slightly misshapen blanket for the grandchild I hoped he might one day have. "No," I said, my voice soft but certain. "Revenge is a dish best served cold, they say. But sometimes, it's best served publicly, in a crowded room, with irrefutable evidence and very bright lights. We didn't just expose a lie, Thomas. We reclaimed a truth." He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Those remarkable eyes. My brother's eyes. The journey that had started with a stranger on the side of a desert road was over. I had picked him up looking for a destination, and in the end, we had both finally found our way home.
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.